Hey, everybody, it's Ed. Hope y'all are doing great. I've got a very quick favor to ask of you. If you happen to be listening to this podcast episode on Apple Podcast or on iPhone, or if you have access to Apple Podcast, could you please do me a huge favor and click 5 stars on the Apple Podcast review for Mountain and Prairie? I always talk about don't look at podcast numbers, don't look at reviews, don't pay attention to downloads, blah, blah, blah. And for some reason, the other day I saw that I'm hovering at just below 1,000 5-star reviews for the podcast, and now it's stuck in my brain and I can't get it out. And I really just want to pass that 1,000 mark, and then I can move on and quit thinking about it. So if you got an extra 12 seconds and you can click the link and go through and give me 5 stars, I would really appreciate it. If you don't like it, say you like it at 4 stars or you like it about 3.5 stars, don't worry about it. Just keep listening. Forget I ever said this. But if you like it at 5 stars and you can take the 12 seconds to push that button, that would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Dr. Alan Townsend. Alan is a scientist, author, and dean of the Franke College of Forestry and Conservation at the University of Montana. His newest book is titled This Ordinary Stardust, A Scientist's Path from Grief to Wonder, and it's an unbelievably powerful book. It's the story of Alan's family being rocked to the core by 2 unthinkable back-to-back tragedies, his 4-year-old daughter and wife both being diagnosed with brain tumors. Alan is a highly trained Ph.D. level scientist who spent his entire career using cold hard facts, emotionless inquiry, and academic rigor to try and solve some of the world's most pressing problems. Yet when faced with a father and husband's worst nightmare, he was forced to accept that science alone was simply not enough to make it through the gauntlet. I was blown away by Alan's insightfulness and vulnerability, and how he managed to constructively meld science and spirituality to make sense of an unimaginable catastrophe. Alan was born in Hawaii and grew up in Montana, where he spent much of his youth hunting, fishing, and exploring the West's wide-open landscapes. His education and career in science allowed him to delve deeper into the natural world, giving him an even more intense respect and appreciation for the beautifully complex biological systems that make up our world. He's worked in the Amazonian rainforest, the Costa Rican jungles, and he's published more than 140 peer-reviewed articles. But as you'll hear in this conversation, Alan also embraces the more ethereal and unknown aspects of our existence, and he has a gift for discussing and writing about them in a very powerful and helpful manner. We met up at Alan's office at the University of Montana and had a very meaningful conversation about grief, curiosity, generosity, open-mindedness, focus, and family. We talked about Alan's upbringing in Montana, his path to becoming such a highly trained scientist, and his process of reevaluating the limits and usefulness of science in the face of tragedy. We talked a lot about his late wife, Diana, and her unbelievable toughness, and his daughter, Neva, who thankfully beat the tumor and is now a happy and healthy young lady. We talked about the skill and compassion of medical professionals, Alan's years-long process of writing the book, and the indispensable role of his agent and editor. Alan also offers some wise, hard-earned wisdom for anyone who may be going through their own set of challenges. I love this conversation, I love the book, and I really appreciate Alan taking the time to chat with me. Be sure to click through the link in the notes to grab your own copy of This Ordinary Stardust. Hope you enjoy. All right, Alan, we're sitting in Montana. So glad I got to do this in person. I was texting you yesterday as I was stuck in the airport for many hours, and I was going over my notes for the book and rereading some of the passages. And there was a point, I had on my reading glasses because I'm an old man, and I was in this kind of corner where nobody could see me, but a tear went out of my eye and then got on my reading glasses, and I had to take the glasses off and clean it. And your book is so powerful. I mean, I think when I talk about crying, people are like, "Oh, is that sad?" And it is. There are sad parts, but it's just a powerful book. And I was saying just before we started recording, like, I just appreciate your operating system, the way you approach life, and I just pray that I'll never have to endure the what you did. But there's so many lessons in the book that I found just unbelievably useful. And so thank you, first of all, for writing it.
Well, thanks. It's humbling. Super humbling, actually, to be here with you. I'm a huge fan, and I just got to say that. No BS, become my favorite podcast, and I really appreciate what you do. And so those words mean a lot. One thing I'll say right out of the gate, it was healing to write, right? So for anybody who's kind of going through some hard stuff, and I'm sure we'll get into it, it's one of the things I encourage people to do now. Whether or not you think of yourself as a writer at all, doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be for anybody else, but the process of going through hard things by sitting down and just putting some stuff on paper about it, thinking about it is a helpful thing to do.
Well, and we'll talk about this in detail, but one of the things that struck me throughout the entire story, both of you and your wife, is this kind of falling back on focus as a way to deal with hard things. And I felt like that was the case as she battled her tumor, and then as y'all battled your daughter's tumor together, and then you're doing that after the fact as you're battling grief, and just this ability. And I never had thought about it as clearly as you put it, but just that focus can be a tool. It's just a human tool to help us deal with this crazy life we're in.
Yeah, for sure. And she was way better at it than I am.
She was a machine.
She was astonishing. And, one of the things that, I certainly knew it at the time, but kind of reflecting post hoc and writing the book afterwards. When you separate yourself from the grief a little bit, just trying to understand, man, how the hell did she do that? What was it about her that allowed that? And what lessons can I take from it now? What lessons can other people take from it? And she was astonishingly good at focusing. But I think what was a huge lesson I got from her in it wasn't through this kind of, how do I put it? It wasn't through this like aggro, I'm going to do this thing, right? It's just like she just was so relentlessly curious about the world and about her life and how she was in it. That's what gave her the focus. So there was a lot of just peace in how she focused as opposed to a lot of just tension.
Well, and there was a part in there that I really loved where you're talking to the doctor, Henry, I believe, who seems, I want to talk about him in detail, and he was saying, you were talking to him about how does she compare to other patients? And he was saying that there's some patients that they're just like, I want to be the toughest person here. They grit their teeth. And it's, in some ways, it's almost like bravado and like I'm going to not, nothing's going to beat me. And then eventually their stamina for that runs out. Whereas she was much more, that was a natural way of going about things that made life better. It wasn't gritting teeth. It was just almost like, you talk about fluidity a lot in this book. It was a fluid way.
Yeah. I've kind of described it to some that this is overly simplistic, but it was almost as though, this ridiculously awful thing hit that she basically, we all knew right out of the gate, was certain to greatly shorten her life like it did. And she just kind of brushed it aside and said, nah, I'm going to keep living my life the way I want to live my life, as though it was just in the pile of things in a more normal way to deal with in life. And that's really kind of how she dealt with a lot of it. She just almost like she ignored it and just kind of let her standard operating system take over. And that was astonishing to watch.
Yeah. Well, and when I think about it, it seems like, I think if I were in a situation like that, it's not so much ignoring as much as like you've got to, your conscious is taking in all this info. And like on a daily basis, we could sit here and be worrying about every single bad thing in the world that could happen. Yeah. And there's a part in there where I think you talk about kind of choosing to focus in on, this idea of what you can control, but also knowing that as a scientist, there's so much out there you can't control.
Yep.
And so I've always thought like focus is the greatest superpower a human can have. Yep. And this book illustrates that point in a way that I'd never, it's like that to a multiple of 100.
Yeah. And I've kind of learned too and thought through that. We were talking about this before we jumped on here, that we're so consumed so often by just the chronic stresses of whatever in daily life. And that ability to focus in that way, even just internally in our brains, it shifts things where that stress actually reduces because you're redeploying your brain in ways that are more active, more rewarding, just hormonally, right?
Yeah.
Like it shifts that in chemical balance inside that you're a little less bathed in all that nasty crap. And that's, I think, one of the reasons it works so well.
Well, I wanted to, if it's okay with you, talk a bit about life as, kind of in the lead up to all this, because I encourage everybody to buy the book and to read it, because we could sit here and talk about it, for 10 hours and it wouldn't do it justice. Also, before we talk to me about your writing, like you're a scientist, you obviously write a lot, but when I think of scientific journals, and you even say something in the book about most of the time, scientific journals are not the most like page turning reading, but every now and then you'll find a good one. That's awesome. But like, how did you become, you're obviously a very avid reader too, but talk to me about your writing. What's the background there?
Yeah. So, I'm going to sound like a hell of a cliche here, but I've always loved to write and didn't do a lot with it outside of kind of my profession in science for a long time. It started in high school, right here in Missoula, where I grew up. I mean, I had an English teacher, Mr. Chamberlain, who just was a great English teacher and really kind of got me lit up around good works of literature and writing and the rest. And so I loved it then, but I kind of shelved it. I nearly walked away from doing grad school because I decided I was going to go write the great American novel like everybody else who doesn't, but so I always had that pull and wanted to do it, and then played with it for years of trying to do some more just popular writing. I wrote a newspaper column in Boulder for a while.
Did you really?
Yeah. Just kind of trying to talk about science in a more popular audience way. What I learned in time though, and what came through this was, when things got really hard, I just found that I almost had a need. It was a way that I dealt with something difficult, was to sit down, as I talked about before, and write about it. And that started to put writing in a new lens for me. But it's something, I know some people talk about it. I remember being really lucky to meet, John Krakauer a few years ago.
Oh, really?
Talking to John, and, he was talking to a class that I was part of, and he was telling these students, he sat there and he said, I hate writing. Right?
I've heard him say that.
Oh yeah.
Times.
Right. And the students are like, yeah, that's funny. Right. And he's like, no, I'm serious.
He hates it.
I like all the other stuff. Right. I like the research. I like the process. And, it really struck me at the time that I felt lucky. I love it. Like I don't stress about it. It's an outlet for me. I feel the need to do it, which is nice.
Yeah. I've heard him refer to his job as being in the salt mines.
Yeah.
He says every day he goes down. And I think he agonizes over every sentence.
Yep.
Kind of obsessed with that guy because he just, what a one of a kind.
Oh man, he's amazing, right? And he just writes these beautiful books. And but you could see that he was serious. That part was just a chore for him, and for me, it's an outlet.
I had a great English teacher as well in high school named Mr. Blaine, and he. I remember one time I was talking to him after I'd written an essay. I said, it's so interesting because after I write one of these essays, I understand it so much better. He's like, yeah, of course. All it is it's thinking on paper.
Yeah.
And that focus, right. It forces you to kind of take it all down the funnel.
Yep. That's right.
All right. Tell me, you were born in Hawaii.
I was. Yep.
So what were your parents doing? Why were you in Hawaii? Why were you in Hawaii?
Yeah. So we were in Hawaii because, my dad, retired now, but, my parents are both here in Missoula. One of the reasons we're back here was getting his Ph.D. in philosophy of science.
Oh, wow.
And he got it at the University of Hawaii. So my parents met in California and then quickly moved over to Hawaii for him to do his degree. And so that's where I was born, spent the first 5+ years of my life. And then we moved to Montana because, it's like today, right? If somebody offers you a job as a professor in philosophy somewhere, wherever it is, you take it. And so he got offered a job up the road in Bozeman first. One of my good early childhood memories, right? It's very faded and blurred, but, I think, Hawaii is pretty sweet. And I think we had never been to Montana. And I think to my mom, she probably thought Montana was well north of the Arctic Circle. And what the hell are we doing? So we moved from Hawaii to Bozeman. We're there for 2 years, and then something opened up here in Missoula and came here. So he was on the faculty at the University of Montana for a long time.
So like, what was your childhood like? Like, how would you describe yourself as a kid?
I had a really lucky childhood, right? I mean, I had two just wonderful parents who just always supportive and great. I was an only child. And so I had that, and got me outside really early on. I mean, one of my super early memories of Montana that I have no doubt was a sequence of things that led me into my own career. It was being in Yellowstone Park and going through those valleys and looking for animals and just loving that. And so I spent a lot of time outside as I got older, learning to do Montana things, getting out, fly fishing, and just being out. And I was supported in that, and it was a good life. And
when did science become such a focus? Because it's one thing. Yeah, I've heard people talk about PhDs, and at that point, everybody's smart. You know, if you're considering a PhD, but then it goes into endurance. Yeah, and who's either tough enough or hard headed enough. That's what I consider myself with anything I do. I'm just very hard headed to go through that gauntlet and come out the other side. So, like, what's your first? Do you have a memory of when you're like, all right, science has kind of got me here? Yeah, I'd say a couple things. I mean, I liked it young. It came fairly easily to me. It was interesting. It was just sort of this window into the wonder of the world. And because I loved being outside, I think that was a lens on it. But I didn't, for example, go to college saying, this is what I want to do. I mean, I'm not one of those. I've met people in my field who are like, I knew I wanted to do this when I was 5 years old. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? Yeah. Like, that's boring. Like, I don't, hell no. Right. I was all over the map. And so I switched to becoming a biology major in college kind of last minute. And again, because of a couple of classes I took, thinking more about med school at the time, honestly, really? From two professors who were just great. And it just got me lit up a little bit for scientific inquiry. And so as an undergrad, when I really first got my first experience doing research, and that led me to pursue a PhD. And you've always been a big reader, I'm guessing. Is that? Yeah. I don't do as much of it these days as I should, but I try. Yeah. One of the things I loved about the book, I always say like my favorite kind of books are ones that I love reading, and then they open up all these new doors of places that I want to go after I close the book. And when I was looking at my notes, I mean, you could see it. There are all these underlined books and authors that you reference that I have not read, like McFarlane. Oh man. Got a couple quotes in there from Underland, which is Robert McFarlane. But Robert McFarlane is this remarkable outdoor science, nature, all kinds of things writer. Beautiful stuff, and multiple good books. That one, the more recent one, is just a fabulous book. Somebody told me that kind of the perfect combo is read Overstory and then read, was it Underland? Is that what you said? That's so funny you say that, because that's exactly what I did. Oh, really? I haven't read either. And both of those were on the recommendation of my book agent, who's just this utterly brilliant woman. And when we were kind of chewing through what it was going to be, she recommended those two books, and I knew of both of them, but I hadn't read them. So I read them in exactly that sequence. I read the Overstory, and then I read Underland, and I was kind of blown away by both of them. So, I don't want to just go through every single detail of the book, because again, I want people to read it, but I'd love to hear you talk about kind of this process with Neva, your daughter, when you discovered, that she had this brain tumor. Yeah. Because, it's going to kill me. And it's not about me. I know that. But I've got two little girls. Yeah, one of them's 5. And so as I'm reading this, I've got another question about this later. But as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about my 5-year-old. Yep. So, you describe it so eloquently in the book, but I'd love to just hear, like, how do you even begin to deal with that? Because, there's nothing worse. Yeah, it was rough, right? And it was, for her, we had, I would say, about a escalating 3-month clue that something wasn't right. She was not growing the way she should have been, and she started to get all these headaches, and so we knew something was going on. And so you start to go through the sequence, right? But even when we went for her MRI, and whether it's denial or whether it's just pure odds, right? Mostly we thought, it ain't that, right? And so I had made the maybe mistake, being a scientist, kind of Googling around and looking at stuff. So I knew something like this was a possibility. Just thought it was really remote. But
it turned out, I mean, I'll never forget it. Or, I mean, I know the book talks about it, but the, oncologist kind of walking into the room where we're waiting and just dropping the news.
And you're reading his facial.
As soon as he walks in, you're like, uh-oh. And you're just at sea. I mean, you just are utterly at sea, and you don't even know what to do. And your life just flips from some building stress, but kind of some level of feeling of control and normalcy to just you're playing catch up, right? In no time, there's just a million things going on and decisions to make, and you name it. And that was rough.
And so again, all this is in the book, but as you're trying to, as you're in it, there's a part in the book that I really like, and it's kind of a theme throughout in certain ways of, like we were saying, chronic stress, chronic anxiety versus fight or flight.
Yeah.
And how when you're in this fight or flight mode, it's generally people can do that. I mean, like it sucks, but they can do it. But it seemed like in some ways you had to deal with both, because there was this immediate emergency that needed to be dealt with, but then it just dragged out and dragged out and dragged out. So like, can you just talk about? I mean, there's no way through it except toughing it out, but. Think about somebody who's listening to this that's going through something similar, and you've been through it, and you can look back. Like, what are the not techniques, but like the mindset, the framework that allowed you to get through it?
Yeah, and I wish I could say, we knew going in, we didn't. I mean, we were lucky in that Diana and I did it together, and so we were supporting each other too. There would be times when I had my act a little bit more together. There were times when she had her act a little bit more together. I think the latter was probably more common than the former, but nonetheless, right there. So that helped. In hindsight, what I would say, and I do try to write, is like, in the immediacy, some of the fight or flight is fine, right? You just have to deal. And, to your question, and I'll get back to this, but you have so many people say, like, they look at our story and like, oh my God, like, how could you, right? How could you possibly do it? And you do it because you have no choice. And what was really illuminating to me, you might know intellectually as a person, but when you're going through it is, sure, our particular combination is very low odds and very weird and very gutting and hard, but I mean, we don't get through life without difficulty and loss and grief and hardship. I mean, that's just the human condition, and it comes in different forms. And as we started to enter that, the number of other folks we met who all kind of said the same thing of like, I couldn't imagine this happening, but there they were dealing, right? They're just dealing, and we're okay with that. I think it's that chronic stress is where it gets rougher. And that's where I would really, whatever people can do to force themselves into rituals that will lower that stress, even if it feels like I can't, whatever you like to do, I can't go for a run this morning because I got to deal with this thing. It's probably the best thing that you can do, because those little steps that just bring calm to us, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to be better for dealing with that situation. You're going to have less stress in your body. Feed your curiosity, whatever it takes in the middle of hardship, and you'll find yourself relaxing a little bit and then actually better able to both deal with it, but also be better at that fight or flight stuff. When that hard decision has to be made, you won't be making it out of just a complete ball of stress. But that takes a lot of discipline in those moments to just say, it's the last thing I want to do. I'm doing it because I recognize inside me, it's actually going to make me better what I'm doing right here.
That cliche you hear about, I heard it yesterday, when the people come on the flight attendants say, put your mask on before you deal with and with your kids. And I would guess, tell me if you think differently, but when you're in the midst of something like that, the idea of going running, you could almost maybe feel guilty about
Totally.
it. Like why am I? But I mean, it's like taking medicine.
Yeah.
I mean, you're and truly, I mean, I won't go into the details at the end, but in some ways, your life was on the line. I mean, you needed that medicine.
Absolutely, and I think that's precisely right. And if it helps people to think about it that way, I mean, it's a biological fact that doing those things will kind of shift your level of stress and your mental capacity in the right ways if you do them, and whatever it takes, right? And if you don't have time for a full run, like find those 5-minute routines, find those 15-minute routines, whatever it takes to kind of just engineer a little calm and balance, you'll find yourself doing a lot better and avoiding the worst stuff. And I say that as somebody who didn't do that all that well at times. I mean, as the book talks about, right? I mean, we did our best, but especially in jumping ahead a little bit, in the first several months and years after Diana passed, I was a mess. And part of that mess in hindsight was because I got out of those habits that are so critical and can be straight up life-saving.
So Diana, right as you guys were kind of getting your feet under you with Neva, Diana was diagnosed with the worst kind of brain cancer you can get.
Yeah, pretty much.
My uncle got that and was gone in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It's just, and like for people listening, I mean, it's the kind that John McCain had, correct?
Yep.
But it was so inspiring to read how she went about dealing with that and how, again, back to the focus, back to the curiosity. You just mentioned that a second ago. Can you talk about curiosity, both how Diana used it and how you use it as a tool to get through, obviously, the worst tragedy you could imagine, but also get through life?
I knew some of this before, just being a biologist, but I dug into it more later. And even now, I mean, I know just enough neuroscience to make people who really do it very nervous. But it is a fact that, our brains have these different centers of activity, and there are parts of our brains that are all cranked up to kind of unleash the fight or flight and the stress stuff. And when that happens, it tends to suppress our curiosity and lead you into that different mode. But people who regularly deploy curiosity, whether they are just natively that way or they're just kind of good about feeding it, exercising it like a muscle. I think about that a lot right now. It's totally doable, right? You can develop it. You can get more of it. It really does bring rewards in our brain. It unleashes dopamine in our brains. It does things that calm us down, make us feel better. And so there's a really direct connection between kind of lighting up the curious sides of your brain and just feeling better and doing better. And that, in Diana's case, I think in particular, I really realized that afterwards, that was so deeply inside her as a daily habit. I mean, every bit as much as her kind of obsession with running, that she couldn't help but be that way. And so some of her response to the diagnosis, again, I don't think it was some big bravado. I think it's just who she was.
That's right.
It was just like, this is just who I am. I can't help but be this way. And then it had positive feedbacks for how she was able to proceed going forward.
But it was, I think there are a lot of people who have certain operating systems and maybe, very effective and healthy people. And then when the crisis hits, it blows that up. Yeah. And so that's what I found so impressive for both of y'all, is that you were able to, if anything, it bolstered those systems. Whereas I feel like you see a lot of people and they'll just completely, and it's not a judgment at all, it's just the reality, and they'll fall apart. I mean, when you think about that, either just as a regular person or when you think about it as a scientist, what do you think separates people who, it's like a bridge, the more weight you put on it, the stronger it gets, some kind of engineered, versus people who is just not strong enough to deal with the stress? I mean, have you thought about that at all? Or is it just kind of luck of the draw? Or I'm not trying to be judgmental of people.
No, I get you. And I have thought about it a lot, and I don't even know that it's strength or not, right? I mean, every circumstance is unique. I mean, I guess I'll just talk about us and me and what I think helped us.
Please.
And part of what I try to convey in the book more broadly is that I'm quite convinced that being trained as scientists and sort of being used to thinking about the world through a scientific lens lent a base to us that was a source of kind of both resilience and comfort that I never would have known up front. I couldn't have described even in the moment, but realized afterwards. And it was much like that curiosity I just described. It's just daily habits, right? And so you mentioned before the kind of drilling into you in science that, you may think you know what the answer is, but you don't. And that's science. And then what you're curious about what it is. And then you're used to failure all the time. You're used to things going wrong. You're used to the answer not being the answer that you want. Like, that's just daily life without huge stakes in it, although at times it can feel like big stakes. But when that becomes habit and things really hit the fan, you start to realize, oh, those are really good skills to have, that, you may be a little more comfortable with uncertainty. Maybe you're just more prone to stepping out of the stress and being like, oh, yeah, but I really want to understand this, or I really want to know the answer, or I really want to find out more, and started to realize those have those positive effects. And that's accessible to anybody. I mean, the point being, like, you don't you don't have to go get a PhD in science to have that, to kind of think like a scientist, to have that approach to life. It can come from anywhere. And that's one of the lessons I think I took from it. And again, I don't want to pretend like, yeah, I had that, so I rolled through this. I did not. I made a lot of bad decisions and I was in some bad places, but I still came out okay. And with time have felt better and better and got past it and got through some of those hard moments, I think, because of some of those habits.
Well, one of the things, of the many things I loved about the book is how you talk about science. I mean, I think, like you just said, it's less about the actual science and more about the operating system of how your brain goes about problem solving and dealing with things. But you're a scientist. It is you. But this book made it clear that you, through this trial you went through, you kind of reevaluated your relationship with science in some ways.
I did.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. And so, I mean, one of the parts of it that don't make me look great, but you learn in life, and science gets portrayed a lot in the world, especially, and it's not fair, but I get it, as, this kind of maybe somewhat inhuman thing. It's all about finding technical advances to X, Y, or Z. It's a new medicine. It's how to build a bridge. It's build an iPhone. That's what it's about, right? And obviously it has extraordinary power in that. Our lives are our lives because of the power of science. But it can lead you down a path of what I think I describe at one point as a danger of a little bit of scientific absolutism, where you just think, okay, science, we give it enough time and effort, can just explain anything, everything, how we feel, what we want to do, you name it. And I think when I was younger, I consciously or not, kind of believed that. And it leads to a little bit of scientific arrogance, and none of which I wouldn't want anybody to take away that that's demeaning it. It's what I do. It's an incredibly powerful, wonderful thing in our lives. But as I went through this, what I realized is that what science actually tries to teach us, like anything else, is that there are limits. There are limits to our control. There are limits to all these things in our lives. And so I started to see it genuinely as this source of life skills and really as a source of kind of spiritual comfort, that a blend of understanding some of how the natural world around us works without understanding everything, and sometimes more and more feeling like I don't need to, I almost don't want to. Having that blend is a way to feel something beyond yourself. And it wasn't that for me before, but it's become more that.
Another thing that struck me as very timely about this book is I feel like nowadays science is under fire.
Yeah.
And whether you're talking about climate change or the COVID vaccine, I mean, some of the most negative things that I get very little negative stuff. And whenever I do get negative stuff, if you want to send me negative stuff, I'm not going to respond to it. P.S. I refuse to. Somebody said one time, if you're going to wrestle with a pig, two things are going to happen. You're going to get dirty, and the pig's going to love it. Yeah. So I'm not playing these games with people sending me mean emails. But the mean emails I get are oftentimes about climate change.
Yep.
Oh, you're talking about. I'm talking to scientists about climate change. And these people are just furious about it. And one of the things that I loved about your book is you talk about science. It is a product that humans put into the world, and it is ever evolving, just like humans are. And it's never going to be 100% right. You're always learning. I mean, was that at all a thought as you were writing this book about kind of helping people to better understand what science really is?
Eventually it was. I talked about the process of writing. I mean, I wrote 2 full versions of this book before this one. And that was more just outlet, right?
Just putting it out there.
Yeah. And it was really more sort of purely grief story with science wrapped around it. It was like, I got to get it out there. And then, got some feedback, wrote a second version. Then I went looking for an agent and a publisher and the rest, and learned like, oh, guess what, buddy? Like, you got to think harder about this and write a proposal and do the whole deal. And that got me to back up and think about it more broadly. And that's where I started to think very hard about that, because it was a confluence of something I wanted to do prior to any of this happening, was to write more for popular audiences and try to convey, like, look, let's see science for what it is. And so it did become a bit of a vehicle for that. And I agree with you. I mean, it's frustrating as a scientist, but more frustrating for me in society that, ironically, the tools of science are used to divide us. Right. I mean, like, the tools of scientific understanding, how our psychology works and the rest are absolutely weaponized through aspects of the media, through all kinds of things to deliberately inflame and divide us. And here we are. And so I wanted to try in some ways to paint that picture that we're all a hell of a lot more alike than we are different. And we need to find that common ground, and that nothing in our lives, if we want anything in our lives to be perfect in order to trust it and to feel like it's, then we're not living in the real world. And that extends to science. And that doesn't mean it's not miraculous and wonderful and absolutely essential. But of course it's going to have fallible moments because it's a human system. And that's kind of what I wanted to get across.
Well, and in some ways, those moments where it's wrong or maybe not exactly right, like that's exactly what needs to happen so that it can continue to get better.
Exactly. And that's what science teaches you, right? So you're learning, and there's great systems in place for the most part. It's like if something is really off the rails, it's going to get weeded out in the scientific process. And that's the sad element to me we all deal with, right? Like the fact that something's not always right, or we have uncertainty, or you name it, right? You can find cherry pick some example. Doesn't take away the fact that there are basic truths that go beyond human systems. It's a basic truth that the climate is changing. It's a basic truth that the COVID vaccines were remarkably effective. I mean, you can go down the list. So it is, again, really worrisome to me and sadly ironic that, again, the very products of science are being used to sow distrust in science for crummy reasons.
Yeah. And when you think about climate change, I did an event down in Texas with folks, a lot of kind of DC types in the federal government who have worked in different parts of around the Endangered Species Act and that kind of thing. And so it's this room in Texas, and I can promise you everybody in there was the full range of political affiliations, which is great. That's what I want. But there was no denial from anybody there, or not even a question of, is the climate changing?
Yeah.
And so that, when you get a diverse group of people like that, all smart, all with good intentions, it makes me think that there's, like you said, it's being weaponized, whether it's by media or whatever, just to get clicks. I guess.
Exactly. Or for, given political or economic interests. And it's too bad, because what you just described was that's all I want to see in these is like, let's just deal with the facts. And then we can and should have real debates about, what do we do? That's society, right? Like, what choices do we make? That's okay. I know, in that vein, you had Catherine Hayhoe on a while back, like she's just to me one of the most brilliant people out there at understanding how to rise above some of that and find those commonalities and really bring people together around this. So huge admirer of that. And,
she's kind of the perfect combo because, she's a very devoted Christian. Her husband's a pastor in a church.
Yep. And
so she's able to go in a human to human, context and talk to folks about these issues. And I think that that's one of the reasons I started this podcast actually, is thinking about how I started in 2016 when things were starting to get so divisive. And one of my thoughts was, if I can talk to somebody, and for the first half, the formula used to be first half, talk about this person and their life and how they ended up doing what they're doing. And if you listen for 30 minutes, you realize, all right, this person's a cool person. They're a good person. Their heart's in the right place. Then if you talk about something somewhat controversial, it's hard to get mad at somebody if you know them.
Absolutely.
If you know their story, it's hard to distrust them,
Absolutely. And that's the sad frustration, is I said before, I really believe, I love being back here in Montana for that reason, right? It's this giant geographic state without that many people, which means you really do run into lots of different folks who are coming from different angles. But it just reminds me from growing up here that, again, like we just share so much more than we differ on, and our differences are getting so hugely magnified by these forces that are kind of beyond us. And so I really appreciate what you do around that. I think it's critical right now, because that division is what, you're talking about stress before and dealing with, say, a hardship in our lives, like, a loved one who's sick. Well, the same is true for society, right? We've got these tools that are coming forward here that are deliberately trying to crank up our stress. So we make bad decisions, and we make poor decisions. We make uninformed decisions for all other reasons. And so we got to figure out how to calm down and then we'll make better decisions.
Well, and I think it's worth noting that in the book I learned, you obviously, you seek out different perspectives. Like you said, you like being here in Montana because it's not just all homogeneous political. Yeah. And one of the things that really struck me that Diana did was that part in the book where she had a big connection in New Orleans, Lower Ninth Ward.
Yeah.
And she invited Michael Brown, Brownie. Yep. Brownie's doing a heck of a job.
Yep.
The guy who was the head of FEMA, who there's no debate. He bungled it.
Totally.
And she, who loved New Orleans, loved Lower Ninth Ward, had this deep connection, invited him in to hear his perspective because she wanted to make sure she could understand the other side of the story, the other perspective. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I will never forget that moment. And that's a great example of who she was. I mean, she just wasn't willing to kind of accept the dominant paradigm, whatever it was, to live in these bubbles. And science should teach you that, I think, but she was just really, really good at it, right? And so I would make some pronouncement of, this is that way. She would kind of look at me like, you sure about that? And so in that case, what you're describing, we had gone together to New Orleans about a year after Katrina, and it was brutally emotional for her because she spent a year working in the Lower Ninth and helping there, and we went into the Lower Ninth and it was still just blown apart, right? I mean, the richer parts of the city had been restored, but those had not, and you could still see it. And so it just tore her heart open. And she took that as motivation to create this class at the University of Colorado that really tried to look at Katrina from this multidisciplinary perspective. So her own science, but social science, and you name it. And in the middle of developing that class and starting to teach it, she learned that Michael Brown lived a few miles up the road in Boulder and somehow figured out how to call him. I don't know how she did it, but she got his number and called him up. And she came home one night and she announces this to me and just says, yeah, I've done this. And, I can't remember. I think I wrote it in the book, but it's something like, what the hell are you talking about? You called that guy?
Yeah, dumbass.
And it's like, I had a whole rant, right? And she just gave me this look and she just said, well, yeah, right. I'm supposed to be showing these students from different perspectives. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? So then I, felt super humbled and walked away in shame and to her credit. So she didn't agree with him, but she brought him in. And sure enough, she reached out with kindness. He came in, he happily talked to the class. We went out and drank tequila with him one night and kind of we didn't agree, but we talked to each other. And that moment has really stuck with me in that we need more of us in the world to just show a little grace and not just jump to conclusions and say, okay, where do we find that common ground and how do we advance our understanding? And she was fabulous at it.
There's a picture that I saw a long time ago of Jesse Helms, who was probably one of the most conservative Republicans in North Carolina, where I'm from. He was the senator of North Carolina all as I was growing up. He was like the Ted Kennedy of the conservative South. And there's a picture when Helms was in a wheelchair, couldn't walk. Definitely probably should not, like Strom Thurmond in a way, should have been out of there, so old. But there's a picture of Ted Kennedy, who is his mirror image in a lot of ways, helping him out of a wheelchair to walk up some stairs.
Yeah.
And, those guys, they would battle it out.
Yep.
They'd fight. They just do everything in their power to undercut each other. But at the end of the day, there was respect.
Yep. And that's what we're losing. And that's where, so many rabbit holes, right? And that, again, get back to our kind of modern system where our real live communities are being replaced with these digital communities that are so cranked up to put with like and inflame our rage and our differences. And that's part of that too, right? If you're part of a real community and you're there in person and you're dealing with people in an analog way, you can't help but develop that respect. The same thing you described for doing this. You sit down, you talk to somebody for half an hour, you figure out who they really are. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I can't just jump to this conclusion about this one. Well, you live and engage in a community. You can't pigeonhole people as a single thing. And then you get that respect. And so it's again, one of the things I think a lot about is that how do we put in the effort to restore some of those community ties? Because I think, again, it leads to the better outcomes. But, that's a different topic.
Yeah, it is. And it's the community. I think there's something about, that's why I love these conversations. I think people like listening to podcasts in general is because it's at a human pace.
Yeah.
It's not ultra processed.
Yeah.
And you can really, it's not the same as being in a room with somebody and talking to them, but it gives you it's hard to bullshit on these things.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree.
Whether it's people who've listened to me for a long time and they got a pretty good idea who I am. And because you're so open and generous, they know who you are.
Yeah.
You can't bullshit that. And speaking of generous, that was there's a quote at the end I want to read in a second, but there's this idea of, we talked about curiosity and focus. And then another topic that's big in here is generous. And that's what I feel like this book, just overall, if you had to put one word to it, is very generous. It's this gift to people who need it, or even people who thankfully, I don't need this. I'm not in the middle of a huge crisis, but it has greatly enriched my life and hopefully made my operating system a little bit better, at least like knocked it going in the right direction a little bit. Can you talk about how Diana, there's a part in the book where she wanted you to write about this? Yeah,
she did. And that's, it's always hard for me to talk about just because it was such an emotional period. But so she lived 11 months from her diagnosis. And for the first 8+ of those, she was largely able to be herself. She was affected, but she was just tough as nails too.
Hardcore win and run races.
Yeah. I mean, she went out and won this race and then told everybody later that she almost ran into a tree because she was so dizzy, but that's just kind of who she was. But she was okay. Right. And then, you just don't win with these things. And so the tumor itself started to take deeper hold and rob her of a lot of capacities. And so she knew, right? Like, as much as I think I wanted to be in denial, she knew her time was short. And she forced a lot of conversations from me. One of the things I'm really grateful for, and I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to take a diversion for advice to people. If you're in this with someone that you really love and, it's important, whoever it is, and it could be your partner, it could be a parent, it could be something where your time is limited. She really made us talk about everything. And I didn't often want to do that. And I'm so grateful for that today, because you're not living in wonder or mystery. Like, I know what she thought. I know what I wanted to say back. And one of the things I've thought is, man, as hard as this was, I don't know if you love someone, how you deal if they just walk out one day and get hit by a bus, because you didn't have that opportunity, right? To kind of really put everything on the table. As painful as it might be, it was a real gift. Well, as part of all those conversations, I think she just wanted it to mean something and matter at some level, like all of us maybe do about our lives. So she one night asked me to write the book. She just basically said, I'd written these shorter blog posts to deal with it. So she had some sense of what I was trying to do. And she just said, I want you to write a book about this. And her words were just have our story help other people. And, that was a hell of a thing. I mean, no pressure there.
Right? That's what I was just thinking. That was the word in my head.
Thanks.
I was thinking about pressure.
Yeah, great. But, I just knew I had to do it. And in the end, what I realized later is that it was a gift to me too. As I said at the beginning, I think she knew, even though she didn't say it, that it helped me heal too. And it did.
When there's a part where you talk about the importance of kind of accepting yourself and being who you are and coming to terms with that. And, the more quickly you can kind of become yourself, the better it is on a million different levels. And I'd be curious, with that kind of pressure, I mean, you wrote the book 3 times.
Yeah.
And I mean, how was that process of putting yourself out there? Like both putting yourself out there and revealing some of the most intimate things about your life you could reveal, but then also the pressure of, I really want this thing to make a difference. I mean, did eventually you just have to let go of all that and just let it rip?
To some degree, yeah. Right. I mean, and I felt that at times. I mean, I felt certainly even it's a little, as I was saying earlier, right, before we jumped on, that it's surreal for me after all these years to have it out there in the world and kind of remember, like, yeah, I'm pulling the curtain back on a lot of stuff here. But that's okay. I've gotten used to that. And I've seen it help enough people when I do that, if somebody takes it the wrong way, I don't really care.
Yeah, it's not for them.
It's not for them,
like,
right?
Hey, sorry, there's a misunderstanding. This is not for you.
I don't know you. I don't care.
Yeah.
Right. And so I feel good that at least for some folks, it seems to help them. The desire to have it work, it's a weird combination to feel like, yeah, I really want this to make an impact, not for financial reasons, just to deliver on what she wanted, and have enough people read it that it helps them. And when it's so personal, because that if you start to care about the business side of it in some way, you won't write the book you need to write. And that was also something that got real drilled into me by some professionals who knew what they were doing, very much, including my agent and editor for this, who are just like, nope, you just gotta write from the heart and what you do, and then worry about the rest later. mostly I was able to do that, and just kind of get in a zone and just be like, okay, I got to put it out there. It did help me to write it multiple times too, even though that wasn't intentional, because the first one was just kind of ripping through my grief, right? Through on the page. And even the second one had a lot of that. By the time I'd done that twice, it was a little easier for me to detach from something so personal and think more about, okay, that was for me. Those drafts were for me. The final book has to be actually for the people reading it, not for me. How do I do that? And that helped me to go through it a couple times first.
Yeah, it's just there's so much in there. I'd love to hear more about your partnership with your editor and agent, because I think I always read the acknowledgments of everybody's book.
Yeah.
And you acknowledge a ton of people in there, which all who seem like heroes in whatever they're doing. And I want to talk about some in the medical world in a second, but It seems like you had a great team, and this is a very selfish question, that helped you focus this thing in to get it to a point where it could be most generous and most helpful. I'd love to hear just about the writing process of that.
That's 100% right. And, I think I say in the acknowledgments, I think that, as a scientist, I'm used to collaborative research and writing, and that it benefits from that. And, my agent's name is Anna Sproul-Latimer, and I was just lucky through a mutual colleague to work with her. And I didn't even really know what a book agent did. And I'm sure they vary, but you think like, oh, they're going to help you, sell a book to a publisher. That was like 1% of what she did.
Oh, wow.
She was a deep editorial partner for years, for 2+ years in this. Really, really brilliant mind, and really good at understanding that lens of, here's your story. How do you make it a story for somebody else? And so, it was hard at times. Writing the book proposal itself was a very long, almost 2-year process after I'd written drafts of the book. And that's because she held it to a really high standard, because she knew that it needed that. And I think I half joked at her once that writing my Ph.D. thesis was a hell of a lot easier than this. And it was in some ways, but I just straight up, this book is not the book it is without her. And then that's also true. The editor who did this, her name is Maddie Caldwell, and she's equally brilliant. And just the two of them are real parts of this book for kind of helping me realize this is working, this is not. Here's how you do it. Here's what you have to think about. Having that high bar for nope, you don't get to half-ass this. You got to go back and think harder.
Like a coach in a lot of ways.
Totally. Yep. So it really a team sport for sure.
And one of the folks mentioned throughout the book, and then also in the acknowledgments, the doctor, Henry.
Yeah.
There needs to be a whole book written about that guy.
Oh, tell me about it.
What a badass.
Yeah. Henry.
And just everything about that guy just interested me. Can you talk about Henry?
Yeah. So Henry's Henry Freedman. Henry's an oncologist at Duke Hospital at the brain tumor center there. And I don't even know where to start. He's just a deeply human person. And so fabulous doctor, obviously right on the cutting edge of doing brain tumor science. But this was a guy who, as I describe in the book, when we saw him for the very first time, he walks in the room and he's kind of a disheveled mess, and he's, wearing this Duke hoodie, and I'm not sure I've ever seen him wear anything different. And he just took Diana into his arms, didn't even know her. And he did the same to me. And he would do that every time. And the humanity in that was astonishing. And to do what he does, see what he does, treat these kind of cancers, many of them that are going to go south every time, and to bring that humanity the way he did, I'll never forget it.
He seemed to match Diana's energy very well. They're both kind of trash talkers and get fuel from that. And it seemed like they really played off each other, which made the whole, a terrible situation much better.
Yeah, it really did. And it's funny you say that, because in the midst of this gutting pain where you realize what you're talking about, I can remember multiple times sitting there with Henry and Diana and recognizing that oh my God, I'm not freaking out and stressing out in the moment, because I'm so enjoying watching these two go at each other. And you're right about it. But I think he knew exactly what he was doing, right? I think he knew exactly what he was doing. And that approach was also medicine, was healing.
Well, and I think it speaks to some of the stuff we've already talked about. He's at the truly on the NBA, if there's a doctor equivalent of the NBA All-Star team, he's on it.
Yep.
And yet he's as highly skilled, highly technical, smart, focused as you can be. But then he's kind of leans into that other side of things, the softer, harder to pin down.
Yep.
And it would be interesting to see how he worked with folks who were not as interested in joking around or because he has to match that energy, I would guess. And that's just, I don't know how you do it.
I mean, one of the things that I'm also, it's so weird to be, feel gratitude when something so hard happened, but I also feel so lucky, and I know not everybody gets this experience. I feel so privileged in many ways. I mean, we had great healthcare, and this country's a disaster in many ways around that. And I don't mean that just technically, we had it technically, but that humanity was not just in Henry. I mean, he was extraordinary, but the number of people we ran into in this journey who were just so exceptional. Same. I mean, we still have a close relationship with Neva's surgeon, Todd, that I talked about in here. Yep. And, same thing, right? Like just this astonishingly technically skilled human being who's just a good human being. And the difference that makes for a family like ours going through a journey like this is everything. So really lucky. One
question, I mean, would be a question for a lot of doctors over a long period of time, but I was curious if you were picked up on, so to be that great at that job, you're obviously smart, but to be great, you've got this level of compassion.
Yep.
I mean, they're giving out their cell phone number, and were you able to get any insight on how they're able to do that job and not have it just wreck them? But like, how do they turn it off? Were you able to, because my wife and I were just talking about that recently. I mean, did you have any insight into that?
I don't know fully, right? I mean, my only, which is nowhere near the same arena insight, is that, those of us who work on kind of global conservation climate issues, there's a little bit of that, right? I mean, because we're also besieged with pretty stressful, worrisome news all the time. And you have to figure out, how do you just find optimism in it? Some of that is just the decision. Like, that's just how I'm going to be. But I don't, when you're talking about like, okay, I'm treating kids who might not live, and you show up with that energy every day and that humanity every day, and you don't just have it wreck you. I don't know. I mean, I think what I will say about some of the folks we worked with, I think of Todd, Neva's surgeon, and when we were so comfortable in going with him in these moments where this is a guy that if you're going to stack people up and say, all right, you deserve to have a big ego because of what you can do. He doesn't. I mean, he might deep down, and I'm sure he has confidence in what he does, but like, that's a thing, right? Like, comfortable enough to be comfortable with yourself.
That's the ultimate.
Yeah. So the ego doesn't have to center, and then, the humanity can come out. And, what that formula is, I don't know, but we were sure fortunate to interact with some people who have it.
It's so inspiring. And it's almost probably kind of weird or unhealthy how much I'm always trying to figure people out and why they act the way they do. But I mean, I think more times than not, the people act arrogant because they're lacking confidence. They're lacking truth. And the most confident people are like that.
Yeah.
Like, yep, I'm here. And then with that spirit of generosity behind it.
That's right. Yep.
I want to talk a bit about what you're working on now. Cause I mean, all this amazing book, but you've had this just unbelievably, really, really cool career doing really, really cool work. Like, describe your job right now. So we're at University of Montana in Missoula. I mean, we're right up against a mountain that I was on top of this morning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so, tell me about your work in your areas of interest, expertise, all that.
Sure. So and it's changed with time. So I'm really in a broad brush an ecologist by training. I mean, my branch of it is that as the book talks about, I study what are known as biogeochemical cycles. And so those are the basic elements that make up life and everything else on the planet and how they go in and out of life. And it's fascinating in school, but it's also very societally relevant in the sense that, the climate is changing because we're altering the carbon cycle. We have dead zones in the Gulf of Mississippi because we're altering the nitrogen cycle. So there's all this really important work that needs to be done to understand that. So I did a lot of that for a long time in terms of the science. I don't do much of that science directly so much anymore, and I really miss it. I love being in the field. But because I've taken this turn into doing jobs like the one I'm in now, and so I'm the dean of what's known as the Franke College of Forestry and Conservation at the University of Montana. And I love that too. I mean, my job is about now trying to kind of foster and support the success of others doing that same thing, everything from students to faculty members to staff here. And it's inspiring in a different way. And partly, I mean, I'll give a huge credit to this place. I mean, it was coming home for me. As I said, grew up in Missoula. I knew the university for a long time through my father and the rest. I knew it was a pretty special place for its culture, but this place there's just a lot of good people in this college.
Seems like it.
They really are. And like, they care for the right reasons. They care for each other. They care about the work they're doing in conservation and the rest. And so I have my days where like you're just dealing with some BS problem, and that's just life as a dean. But I definitely have my days where I miss the freedom to go, run around the Amazon or Costa Rica like I used to, chasing my own questions. But for the most part, showing up for a group like this to help them do that is easy because they really care and they're making a difference. And so it's fun. It's fun to do that too.
I think of the analogy of being a really good basketball player and then going in. I'm talking a lot about basketball, not really basketball, but being a good basketball player and then being a coach.
Yeah.
And it's two completely different things though.
Totally different.
It's not, I mean, just because you're really, really good at playing basketball doesn't mean you'll be a good coach.
No.
So that's, it's impressive that you've been able to make that. But although I'm so glad you're here in Montana, and I mean, this is the spot, although we were neighbors in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And we didn't what streets did you live on? Where's the cross street?
We lived on, oh my God, how am I forgetting right now? My brain has gone dead.
Near like Good Neighbors, right?
Yeah. It was about 6 blocks from Good Neighbors.
I'm like 2 blocks from Good Neighbors.
Straight out of CC going north there.
Nevada?
2 blocks over from Nevada.
Cascade?
I was on Cascade. We lived on Cascade. Yeah. So like we walked over and hung out at Good Neighbors all the time.
We were very well in there at the same time.
That's funny.
Yemi, who owns that place, is now the mayor of Colorado.
Yeah, exactly.
I had him on the podcast.
That's funny.
So like, where do you see your career going? I mean, what is of interest to you? I mean, it seems like you got a lot of different options. It seems like where do you feel drawn? I mean, I know you got your hands full right now. You may not be thinking forward, but it seems like, and even more writing. I mean, like where do you see everything going as you look forward to the next, 5-10 years?
I've thought a lot about it, and I really do. Like I love where I am. I love showing up for these people. I have no immediate plans to do something else. There's also a reason, right? People joke that like these kind of jobs, these leadership administrative jobs, like you don't do them forever unless you're, a huge narcissist or really dumb or something. I don't know, because like they take their own toll. And it gets back to that creativity, right? Like I would like to finish this up and be able to move a little bit more into expressing more of that, and probably especially through writing. I mean, I like doing it so much. I'm working on another project now, and it's a great outlet for me. So I'd love to have more time to do that, whatever that looks like.
There's a quote at near the end of the book, probably, pretty near the end, that I loved, and I'm going to write it on my bulletin board. But it says, "There's no greater solace and joy than that which comes from being generous, by being endless curious, and by never being afraid to fail."
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, like, look at all the stars and everything. If you pick this up book, if somebody picked it up off the street, they'd think a crazy person had been scribbling in it. But I mean, and there's so many quotes like that in here, but I feel like that, for as powerful a story and as personal a story as it is, and it's your family, but I don't care who reads that. If you can't connect with that, I mean, that's kind of like the secret to life, generosity, curiosity, and being willing to just go for it. Don't you think?
I do.
I mean, obviously you wrote it.
We all try it, but I know that section, and I wrote it, that's late in the book when I'm sitting beside Diana's grave in Boulder and remembering that lesson from her, because she was extraordinary at living that way. And that's part, like I want people to know that about her personally, but hopefully have it inspire them that it's possible. It just takes focus.
Yeah.
And
focus.
It feeds on itself.
Yeah. And it's not easy, and it's scary. I want to talk a bit about some of your favorite books, because there's so many in here, and some of them I have these weird moments, because like there's a great quote in there where you're talking about Peter Heller, talking about grief, and I'm like, I had him on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, and he's an awesome guy, but it seems like there's a lot of overlap between our interest in books, but there's a lot of gaps that I need to fill in. But I mean, you talked about Overstory, and what is it? Under what? I'm sorry.
Underland.
Underland.
Yeah.
Tell me more about books that have meant something to you. Could be scientific, just be anything.
Yeah, I knew this was coming listening to you, and there's a lot in there. And so I try to think about it some, and there's no, you could go on forever, as you say, but I'm going to throw a kind of a maybe somewhat random array out.
Please.
And these are just ones that have really hit me in different ways. The first is, the guy who led me your way in the first place. So Chris Dombrowski, who's here, both of his books blew my mind.
Yes.
I mean, they just blew my mind, right? Like as beautiful a writing as I've ever read. And, Body of Water first was just, I'm a fisherman too, but that's like, it's about fishing, but it ain't.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And, that was amazing. And then his memoir, the newer one, The River You Touch, is just like, I read it so slowly because it's just, you just want to savor every word. Those same thing for anybody, just beautiful humanity and beautiful writing. So I'd say those, another guest you've had on, and speaking of, this is the other thing I want to say, like on generosity for folks, like I've jumped into a new world here, kind of writing in this way as much as I wanted to do it. And I felt like such a newbie and such a like, oh my God. And like to have these remarkable people show me so much generosity in the process that have been tied to it. And several of them have. I mean, I mentioned John Krakauer before, like super kind in this. I've been in touch a little bit with Peter Heller now, and it's just like the nicest damn guy, right?
As nice as they come.
Yeah. And so I've just been so humbled by that. Another one of those is Betsy Gaines Quammen.
Yeah. See her tomorrow.
Betsy and Dave, both of them, but like Betsy's book, True West, I just thought that was fabulous. Right?
There's a lot of overlap between the ideas in this book and that book.
I agree. I was just like, I read it when this was like already waiting to be printed, and I was like, oh my God, right? Like, and so, yeah, like the things that she gets into that and talking about how we find our commonalities while calling out the extreme crap at the same time. I think it's brilliantly done. So there's a novel, you talk about the West a lot. Do you know Whiskey When We're Dry?
I've heard of it and people have referenced it, but I have not read it.
Yeah, it's by the guy, I haven't met him, a guy by the name of John Larison. And it's a novel about late 1800s West, right? But it's just unique. It's just this different twist on a Western that's really, really, really well done. Just a great novel. That's one I'd throw out there. And then I'm gonna do two off the radar, largely short books of poetry that have really touched me. And so one I do quote at one point on here, was a woman by the name of Rebecca Elson, and she was an astrophysicist, but also a poet who, very deep connection here, right? She died of cancer right around the age of 40, really young. She wrote this collection of poems facing her own mortality. And there's a book called A Responsibility to Awe. And it's 20 plus years old now, but you can still get it, fine places. And there are some poems in there that just blew my mind. I mean, that mix of science and humanity and just extraordinary stuff that people like. And then a recent one, I had, someone really dear to me just give me In Old Sky, which is this short collection from Lauren Camp, who's a New Mexico poet laureate.
Yeah, I've heard of her.
And it's kind of tied around the Grand Canyon, and I'm just reading through it right now, but it reminded me of Elson's book too. There's just these really beautiful poems, and for people who love the West and love the outdoors, there's some great stuff in that.
Those are all great. Those are great. We'll have links to all those so that people can click through. I always like people to finish up with some words of wisdom, but I feel like your book is 250 pages of wisdom that everybody needs to read. But I mean, did I miss anything? Anything else that kind of parting words? It's just really, I'm really amazed by what you've put out here, and it's really like talk about generosity and just excellent writing and taking these massive ideas and putting them into a form that not only a pert dumbass like me can understand, but that they're actionable. I mean, like it's very, very powerful. So any kind of parting words or wisdom you'd like to impart?
Maybe I'll just say this just out of the blue, because this comes up sometimes. People ask, how are you okay kind of being that vulnerable, like putting that stuff out in the world? And I'll say this, right? Like at the beginning, when this all went down, I had no, I'm just living, right? Like I just got to go. But I was doing it at the same time that I was working in a similar job at Duke. I was working as a dean at Duke, and like, you're supposed to lead all these people. And so I guess I just want to, like, maybe especially for guys, like, don't be afraid to just open yourself up, right? And be vulnerable. And like, I feel like the more I do that, the more I actually get positive returns. I mean, every once in a while somebody is a dick, but who cares?
Yeah,
right?
who cares?
Like, in general, like, that gives others permission to just kind of be honest themselves. And those are the conversations we need to have. So just say, don't be afraid of it.
Well, man, this was really awesome. I could just keep drilling you with questions, but I want people to get the book and enjoy it for themselves. But thank you, man. I mean, it's awesome to meet you. I'm so glad this worked out to do it in person versus the silly internet. But I'm really, really glad to know you. I hope this is the first of many, many conversations. But thank you for everything you're doing.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Ed. Real pleasure.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.